For everybody who has joined, thank you so much. This is Lori Sedgwick, and I'm Director of Career Management for Executive MBAs and alumni of Johnson. And so happy to once again be hosting Chandlee Bryan, who has done a couple of fantastic webinars for us. This evening session will be on strategic social media. And this is Chandlee's 8-year anniversary since writing her book on social media, I believe. And I'll let Chandlee, you can tell them a little bit more about your book. But before I turn things over to Chandlee, want to give a shout out there about a program Chandlee will be doing on April 18th on resumes, and she'll specifically be focusing on the summary. And so these will be a webinar specifically focused on executive resumes, and we'll make sure that we get lots of communication advertisement out about this. So we're going to host that webinar again on a 7:30 to about 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on April 18th. So keep an eye out for more information about that. But let's turn things over to Chandlee for this evening's session on strategic social media. And I'm happy to take questions through the chat feature toward the end. And Chandlee, thank you so much. Looking forward to tonight's session again.
Thank you, Lori. I'm honored to be here. And just to share with you a little bit about myself, 8 years ago, I co-wrote a book called The Twitter Job Search Guide. And if you look for it on Amazon, you will see the world's largest BlackBerry and a subtitle that talks about communicating in 140 characters. And both of those are slightly, I wouldn't say humiliating, but just humbling in terms of how fast some technology can pass out of relevance. Certainly, as you likely know, Twitter's now increased their character limit, which was one of their defining features, to 280 characters. And, well, the size of the phone speaks for itself. But one of the things that I'm really excited to talk about with you tonight is just why I feel like Twitter is one of the most interesting and impactful tools that you can use for your career. And I feel like it has the ability to influence our society in some ways really rather dramatically. And I wanted to start out with 3 examples of that, 2 of which I'm confident that you'll be familiar with. And the first, I'm going to take us back to the summer of 2014, when one person, for a friend, basically took up the issue of the Ice Bucket Challenge without letting the ALS Society know, or Foundation know, that he was doing it. And it caught on, went viral, raised $115 million, had people all across the world taking the challenge, and essentially 96 million of the funds that have been raised are actively in progress to help find a cure for ALS. So it was pretty amazing how that can happen. And the ALS Foundation, once they found out what's happening, said, you know what, we will accept that as a campaign, and we will take that on. So that's one example of the power of Twitter. Second one was Alyssa Milano back this past October, launching the Me Too campaign. And actually, Me Too had been started 3 years before by someone else, but she just used her power and her influence, because certainly she has many, many followers, to raise the question. And then that essentially caught on like wildfire, as we know, and resulted in the person of the year being the silence breakers, or those people who were basically raising their hands and saying Me Too and drawing attention. So I think that that's one way that Twitter can be used. In fact, it's said that in terms of its effect across industries, even back in 2010, in Hollywood, they were saying that in some ways the box office success of a movie could be measured based on the Twitter metrics within the first 3 hours that the film had been out. So it really has a ripple effect across industries. And as you know, many companies have employees whose exclusive job is to mine Twitter and respond to customers and consumers, and to help with their own customer relationship management systems. The third and final example that I'm going to give tonight is an example from Mark Stelzner, who wrote the foreword for our book, who at the height of the 2008 recession just said, basically, I was thinking last night that if each of us just helped one person find a job, we could start making a dent in unemployment. And very quickly, this sparked a movement that ultimately found jobs for more than 1,000 people. I think at some point they stopped counting, and he eventually transitioned that into a nonprofit and had that acquired and has rolled it over. But it's an example of the type of good that can happen on Twitter. One of the things we're going to talk about tonight is how you can use Twitter to suit your own needs. And if you remember nothing else from tonight, I want to emphasize that Twitter really is what you make of it and how you use it. I know some people that use it exclusively to monitor information, some people that use it to develop and cultivate relationships, and some people who use it for just about everything. So there are many, many different ways that you can use it. But one of the things that I think is really important to know is that Twitter is actually accessed more, in at least several studies have shown that Twitter is accessed more by users in the US than LinkedIn. So while LinkedIn may be sort of the default social network in terms of professional networking that people think of very quickly, people who are active on Twitter are actually really good connections to engage, and are often very much more accessible than other people may be. So that's just a seed I want to plant as we go through tonight, is how can you use it to benefit you and your goals, whether it's personal or for your organization in your career. So, or personally, there are many, many different ways that you can use it. But today we're going to cover 4 primary things. First, I'm going to talk about why Twitter is important. Secondly, I'm going to cover how to read and tweet and just general communication strategies. I'm going to share with you a strategy that I use and that I recommend for what I call sharing without bearing. So how to basically say what you need in a way that also protects your privacy. And finally, I'm going to share with you a few tips to optimize. And I'm going to wrap up with some bonus tips that are going to be in the PDF that Lori will send you this evening, that has information on how employers search for you. So that is a webinar that we presented earlier last year, and that got a strong response. So I felt like it would be helpful for you to have some of those tips. And tonight, I'm also going to start off by basically giving you an example that comes directly from some Cornellians, and essentially asking a quiz. And so somebody, one of these 4 Cornellians shared a primer on conversational business, which was about the use of messaging apps, speech-based assistants, and chat bots to automate communication. And we have here Mike, a co-founder and CEO, who I believe won an entrepreneurship contest at Cornell not so long ago. Vu Francois, who hopes to work in product marketing. I believe he's still at Cornell. Tech strategist Cynthia Williams, and Emily Walsh, an investor and growth stage B2B. So I'll be revealing that answer later on this evening, but think about who may have shared that particular content. When I think about Twitter and how to get information across and how to use it, there again are so many different ways that you can use it. It's been it was founded to have a very simple format of communicating in 140 characters. Again, that's expanded to 280. Personally, I find that Twitter has made me a much better writer, because learning how to communicate in a short, efficient way is certainly a more effective mode of communicating, especially, as you know, in the C-suite and in business. And just thinking about how to revise communication so that it's short and sweet has many, many uses and is an effective strategy overall. But now you can also compose tweets with photographs and images and link to infographics and information. But essentially, it's been very hard for the business world to figure out how to use it and how to buy it. So it's been searching for a buyer for quite some time, and the stock has gone up and down. So it's had a rockier road than many of the social networks. But at the same time, I believe it's truly, absolutely invaluable. And there are about 342 million active Twitter users and 2.1 million search queries every day. So it's a very active network. When we think about why Twitter is different than other networks, the first thing I want to say, and I assume that many of you have already used Twitter, but the ability to essentially use Twitter to send a message that can be seen by any user that has not locked their account, and there are very few users that do lock their accounts, is a barrier buster. So on Facebook, I know I tried to connect with a long lost friend, and I sent her a message, and it basically got unseen, and I finally found a different way to connect with her, and we were able to connect. On LinkedIn, if you don't have someone's email address, at some point they will ask you to subscribe for premium membership, and even if you are a premium member, the number of invitations that you can send and unsolicited messages can be limited. But Twitter is really a barrier buster in the fact that you can send what's called an @reply or a message to any username on the platform, and that's a really powerful way to get in touch with someone. While writing the Twitter job search guide, we decided that we wanted to publish some social media guidelines that had been developed by Eastman Kodak, and I sent a tweet to their chief marketing officer, Jeff Hazlett, and he got back to me within half an hour. He was not someone who had ever met me or had any reason to know me or to write me back, but literally I heard back from him very quickly. And I just think it's pretty incredible that you can essentially really exponentially shorten the distance between you and someone that you want to connect with, and that in that fast of an amount of time. So it's really easy to have conversations with the people who are on it. In terms of keeping pace in your field and exchanging knowledge, the use of hashtags in Twitter means that even if you can't go to a conference in your industry or you need to follow something that maybe you would need to access a network or pay money or a subscription fee to get access to. Otherwise, you can simply follow the hashtag and get updates. It's really pretty incredible in terms of the ability to keep pace in your field and exchange knowledge with other people. And I've found it to be very, very helpful for both me and for the people that I work with. It's also used frequently by employers to scout prospective hires. So 35% of Fortune 500 companies have recruiting accounts. I was working with a student recently. I also work in career services at Dartmouth College, and my student said, essentially, I've applied to 18 media companies. I'm not hearing back. And I said, have you tried Twitter? And she said, well, why would I do that? We found a recruiter on CNN. I sent her a message, and 20 minutes later, I looked at my, before she left my office, I said, let's check to see if she'd replied, and she'd already sent me back a note. So it's a really fast way to connect with people. And 57% of companies say that they enjoy connecting with job seekers via Twitter. So it's really a place that you can do outreach. Conversations on Twitter can also lead to jobs. In the process of putting together the Twitter job search guide, my co-authors and I interviewed a baker's dozen of job seekers who had received jobs through Twitter, and all of them had gotten connected with people they never would have met had they not been on Twitter and not been looking to source and seek out connections. And it just really can be a great way to make those introductions. If you look at the top sources of hires in terms of how employers prefer to hire, social professional networks have really caught up to employee referral programs. And the nice piece of that is that it's something that you can control. You can initiate and build relationships very quickly. And in fact, one of the things I'm going to show you tonight is a tool that is being offered to you already through Cornell in the form of some Twitter lists specifically of Johnson alums that you can connect with. And in using Twitter, you can showcase three things that I think can really lead strongly to influence your own professional brand. And those three things are you can showcase your cultural fit. You can, for a role, you can showcase your industry related knowledge and your professional experience. And one of the things that I think is really important to know as you share information on Twitter and other platforms is you don't need to generate all the content yourself. And in fact, you shouldn't. One of the things that I learned really early on is that people in social media often call others who only tweet about themselves or when they have something that they want to share about their own work, seagulls, because they basically fly in, they talk about themselves, and then they fly out. Ideally, you want to spend at least 40 to 50% of the time sharing the ideas of other people and basically doing something which is called a retweet, which is sharing but then commenting on what you like. And oftentimes when you can show interest in someone else, it really increases the chance that they're going to show interest in you back and create a relationship. So for example, last year I became a big fan of Amazon's show Good Girls Revolt, and I commented on a couple of things, and I ended up having conversations with both one of the lead actors and also the writer of the original book, Good Girls Revolt, which was really fun and just a gratifying and unique experience. And it was very simple to do that simply by sharing interest in what they were doing as well. And those things relate very directly to three top traits that JobVite has identified as ideal traits of candidates that they like to hire, and that's basically conversational skills and enthusiasm, and then sometimes knowledge of industry certainly doesn't hurt either. But you can demonstrate all of these three traits directly through Twitter, and you can do so very easily. And one thing I'd also like to add is, in addition, your use of Twitter is much more anonymous than LinkedIn, since in LinkedIn, anytime you make a status update or a comment, oftentimes that's visible to your entire network, whereas on Twitter, usually there's just a select group of people who are using Twitter, so it's much more anonymous. You still have to be careful what you say, but I think in general, if you are expressing interest in another organization or building a relationship outside of your current line of work, it doesn't always look as publicly like you're actively in job search mode. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Twitter is also a very valuable tool for expanding your online presence. It's actually 8th in traffic among all US websites, and it has a very high SEO ranking in Google search. In fact, people who are on Twitter spend more time on Twitter than people who are on LinkedIn use LinkedIn. So Twitter users on average spend over 6 minutes on the site, while LinkedIn clocks in at a little under 5 minutes. So if you are consistently present on Twitter or use it strategically, you may find that you have both a better chance of being visible and connecting with the people that you want, and you might have a higher quality in terms of your interactions. So if you haven't used it before, I encourage you to check it out, because again, visibility and new connections can lead to referrals, and referrals can lead to jobs. And employers' number one source of external hire, or how they hire people they don't know before, is referrals from other people. And you can certainly generate those just as you do through networking events at Cornell and in other aspects of your life. You can generate those types of relationships that can lead to referrals directly through conversations online. So those are a few of the reasons why I recommend using Twitter. Now I'm going to share with you a few strategies in terms of how to read and tweet or make new connections on Twitter. And I'm not going to focus tonight on Twitter 101 because they have some very good resources for that. Again, Lori will be sending you the deck so that you have access to the overall slides, but I strongly recommend at Twitter's Help Center. There's also a guidebook by Mashable that I recommend, and these guides can help you overall as you get started, but we'll go over just a little bit of how Twitter works and what makes it different. So first of all, I just wanted to share with you how following works. Similar to other sites, anytime you follow someone, you will receive status updates. There is a feature, which I will share with you later this evening, called lists, which I recommend to organize Twitter and to make it manageable. One of the wonderful things about Twitter and in my mind, the key differentiating feature, again, of the platform is the ability to tweet or send what's called an @ reply to any message on the platform. So, for example, if I wanted to send a message to Kleiner Perkins, and in fact, I did last week regarding a fellowship that they were advertising, all I have to do is go to their Twitter page and click the tweet button, and they can see that in their own account inside their notifications page. The messages can be visible on your public stream and to the sender's notification stream, but due to Twitter algorithms, you're not seeing them as much as you did in the early years of Twitter. So they've changed it a little bit so it's less conversational noise, but very easy for other people, the people that you intend to see your message, to see that message very quickly. So that is something that I recommend overall, and following is a good way to connect and get other people's information. I wanted to give you an example of how I select tweets to engage in and to respond, and what that looks like. So this is a tweet that was sent out about how employers essentially search for candidates online. This is something called Boolean search. And here is an example of a custom search. This is a woman in the recruiting industry who's sharing information about how Google's custom search works. This is an example of a sample string that I'll detail later in the slides. But here I can see that she has received essentially 5 likes of her message. 3 people have shared it, but no one has responded to that. So that means that if I want to get her attention, a really good way to interact with her is to send her a message through hitting the reply button. So again, you have sort of 4 options with any message. You can certainly follow someone. You can like them, which means you're showing that you've favorited it, and you can see and save your own likes and see those, what other people have liked when you look at their accounts. You can retweet or share that information, and a retweet is best when you've added some of your own commentary to that to amplify the message, or to say what you liked or didn't like about something. And reply. Here I recommended the reply because, again, no one has responded to her in this way, and I can see that she's following essentially only 6,400 people, but she has 24,000 followers. But since no one else has replied to her, she's more likely to see what I've said and perhaps respond back to me. So that's one example of how I might use Twitter strategically. So again, if these are different ways that you can respond, if someone follows you back, you can then send what's called a message. It used to be called a direct message, but a message basically is a private message. Again, because of social media is social, I still recommend that you don't say anything that you wouldn't say to a very basic acquaintance who you've just met. I mean, you still need to know that something can be shared and be public. Certainly, we've seen a lot of that in the media, of people who have made the mistake of assuming something would be private when it really wasn't. So it's important to be careful and deliberate how you use it, but a message is a way to send something privately. In this example, here is how I basically replied to this user, and I said why I liked that information. So for me, working in the employment space, it's important to share a little bit of my expertise some of the time, just because I am using Twitter as one of the tools for my own personal branding. So sharing with her why I think that her tip is important is helpful, not just for her to understand that I see what she's saying, but also for my own professional presence. So those are some things that you might want to think about as you use Twitter and other forms of social media. So the next piece that I'm going to talk with you about is my strategy for how to share without bearing, basically your sometimes the reason behind why you need to communicate. And this is a strategy that I feel that you can use to build a strong digital footprint. I find that one of the biggest challenges oftentimes in using all kinds of communication tools, especially email, is that you can't always hear a person's tone of voice. And I think it's really important to try to avoid misunderstandings and to communicate clearly. And one of my favorite tips for social media comes from at Shri, who is a professor of journalism at Columbia. And he basically says that what's common sense in real life is common sense on social media. And so I'm just going to share a couple of no-nos. I think I barely need to go over this, but it just in general, showing positive signs on social media are better than talking about excess partying or giving or political rants. And I think that the things that I really recommend that people provide on social media are examples of their work, their engagement, and interests, mutual connections. All of these things are positive ways and factors that can impact a recruiter's decision to move forward with candidates. So just being mindful of how you're presenting yourself and knowing that these factors that I've outlined here are sort of some of the classic no-nos in the overall social sleuthing process as employers look for profiles. And one of the things that employers are actively doing is mining using Boolean search or the same search techniques that you use to find information online to search inside sites such as Twitter. And again, this is information that's presented that will be presented in the handout that Lori's going to share with you. But this is information that you want to think about as you present your information. And the concept I want to share with you today is what I like to call discretionary authenticity. And it is the art of presenting your genuine voice in an accessible, positive, and professional light. And this is a framework that I recommend to create conversations that show your personality, but not your digital dirt. And that you can use, it's a strategy you can use to be your own PR and booking agent. And essentially the AIM model is to think about your audience and define who gets your message, your intent, or what you want to convey, and how to tailor your message. And here's an example of what that looks like. So I have a friend who works in social media for one of the big top 3 consulting firms, and he was getting in trouble at the office for being late to work. So instead of saying, I just got balled out for being late to work, this can't continue, he said, I need a better early morning routine. So he didn't go public with the problem, but he did share what he needed to do. So he got ideas to fix the problem, and he was able to tailor his message. The example that I started with in terms of who shared that primer in conversational business was Emily Walsh, who is a Cornellian who is an investor in growth stage B2B companies at Georgian Partners in Toronto. And here in her primer in conversational business, I learned that 63% of Facebook users have increased messaging with businesses over the past year, and that mobile app usage is in decline. So Emily is sharing information that is on message with her organization and her business. And so here I see how she's used media to give access to her report, and she's used hashtags that can be used if people are searching for information on these other symbols. I like this, especially with Emily, because her information is really showcasing her company. She doesn't have a ton of followers, but she's very her organization's focused. And if you go to their website, you'll see that one of the things that they do is really focus in 4 different areas, one of which is conversational business. So she's doing a good job of showcasing that information. She's also showing a strategy that is quality over quantity. Here are some of her recent tweets. Again, she talks about how she's a proponent of female-led organizations expanding participation in artificial intelligence. So again, she's staying on brand, she's accessible, and she's going for quality of content over quantity. If we look at Emily, we see that she's listening to 310 she's following 400 people and she has 310 followers. So she's not really focused on a large quantity of interactions. She's really being strategic about who she wants to engage with and who she probably hear back from her, especially if you mentioned your mutual connection. Here's another example of a Cornellian who is showcasing her core values and her work in the sustainable food security industry. So Ponce is sharing here a little bit about what she does on the job, and she's using Twitter to educate and provide glimpses into her work. Here is a current Cornell student who gives us information about his background in communications, and who also shares information about what he's doing in terms of continuing his work in the area and also fostering engagement with faculty through a podcast. So these are all examples of how to generate great content. And I'm now going to give you 7 overall tips for that. Again, using hashtags or the basic packaging of how to find information to join conversations and increase visibility. Sharing information of your field of interest. And if you don't have something to say, sharing the thoughts of someone else. In general, as with the AIM model, I recommend when you ask for help, not leading with a need, but essentially expressing interest in other people and other people's ideas, and inviting people to join you on or offline for conversation, to not be shy about sharing your interests, and overall, certainly to avoid going negative and sharing. One of the things that I found from studying storytelling is if you share what you can see with the naked eye and avoid giving adjectives. So for example, if I say today it was -10 degrees this morning, when I walked out to my car, and when I got to the office, it was 77 degrees. You're probably going to know without me saying, I'm having a hard time adjusting to the temperature, or, the office is overheated, outside is too cold. I'm not complaining. I'm just giving what can be seen or felt or measured. And if you can do that, there's less of an opportunity for misunderstanding or miscommunication. So that's just another tip for overall content. Creating a strong personal brand is important. You get 160 different characters, or 160 characters for your bio. And I encourage you to use your keywords for your field, industry, and job. And if you're just starting out, I encourage you to develop a content base before you start to follow other people, so that they can evaluate you and follow you back. So here are 3 examples of bios of Johnson students and alums. So here we have Vu. Again, he's telling us what he's looking for, where he's from, and what he's interested in. We have Georgia, who is really getting a little bit more personal in terms of some of her views are her own and do not represent the organizations that she works with and for. And that's important, because certainly most of the time organizations have a specific social media policy that they want you to follow. And we have Harrison, again, who's showing his continued work in the communications industry and showing his knowledge and sector experience. So each of these are examples of how you can use Twitter. Twitter also gives you a link that you can use. And Vu is linking his directly to his portfolio, which gives prospective employers the opportunity to see more of what he does. Here are some additional bios. We see Ponce is very mission focused. She also has bilingual tweets, which showcases her range of abilities. Here we have and he is very good at explaining that not everyone or understanding that not everyone in Japan knows that Cornell is in the Ivy League. I've had the same issue with Dartmouth, in as close a location as Seattle. So sometimes we do need to explain that context for other people. And I thought that especially internationally, that was helpful. We have Elsa, who is at PwC, and she also gives her specialty areas, as well as a disclaimer that her views do not represent PwC advisory, but they are her own. And I think that that's something that's important to think about. I advised Laurie Sedgwick, and we'll have to see if she does it, earlier tonight, that in addition to her work with you, that she should also share that she's a former parachute jumper, because one of the things that is a differentiating factor and that seems to be something that leads to both engagement and influence on Twitter is sharing something personal about yourself. And in fact, my co-authors for the Twitter job search and I found that all of the job seekers that we spoke with who found jobs through Twitter had shared something personal about themselves. In terms of optimizing your search, I'm going to wrap up tonight just by sharing with you a couple strategies for how you can connect with people and find information on Twitter. You can search hashtags or by keywords. Search.twitter.com is a place that you can go to even if you don't have an account on Twitter. You can use it to follow scores of basketball games for March Madness, for example, even if you don't have an account. And this is a good way to get information about customer sentiment as well. You can also use Twitter Advanced Search to find recruiters. And again, in the addendum to the handout, you're going to get some examples of what those search strings might look like. And also, again, you can use hashtags to search Twitter as well. I strongly recommend using search to find company accounts and people to follow and engage with. You can also use a feature called Twitter Lists to get organized. You can when you create a Twitter list, it's basically a filter. So you only see tweets from those listed. You can create up to 1,000 lists. And if you create a list, you can follow more people, but only see them in your list. So it's a great way to organize Twitter and to find content. And there are several Johnson lists. There's a Johnson students and alumni list. There's also a list of information with Cornell on Twitter. And one of the things that you can do is look at under a user's information, you can see what lists people are on and connect with people that way. So again, those are some ways that you can use Twitter to both customize it to make it a strategic use of the site for your needs, but also make it manageable. And again, ultimately, it is up to you in terms of how you use it to fit for your needs. And 4 different ways that I hope you learned that you can use it today is to make new connections. You can also use it to find job leads under the hashtag found jobs if you search Twitter oftentimes or under specific hashtags for your field. You can find opportunities. You can use it to communicate and grow your network and also to optimize your online presence. So in sum, Twitter is a user-defined platform where you set the tone. You can search like a detective to find what you need and adapt it to suit your own needs. I feel like because it's so versatile, it's why it's so hard to define, but I hope you learned something tonight. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. But my goal is for you to walk away knowing a little bit more than you knew before you came in. So that's the information that I have tonight for you. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or I'm also at Chandlee on Twitter. And again, Laurie will be sharing with you some bonus tools. So thank you so much for having me tonight, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Chandlee. That was great.